Hi, everyone. The League of Women Voters of Illinois is excited to welcome you to today's edition of Issues Briefing 2022. My name is Allison Hout, and it is my honor to serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois. Our annual Issues Briefing is our time to focus on the cornerstones of our League mission work, educating each other, and then using that knowledge and understanding to generate civic engagement, advocacy for change, and voting. The success of the League of Women Voters in empowering voters and defending democracy lies in our ability to foster that civic engagement and facilitate that access to information. And our power rises from our local league presence in communities throughout our state. Issues Briefing is really a pivot point for all of us. From here, we must take what we learn into our communities, where we will listen to understand, we will collaborate, we will educate, and we will activate others. What we know about civic engagement and education is this. Some of you have heard me say this several times this week, and it is still true. People who have information, people who are engaged, those people are much more likely to be voters. So let's educate and activate. Let's see more people use their voice and their vote to speak up about what matters the most to them. Today, as we focus on rights and equity for all who reside in our state, I urge you to listen actively, ask questions, and then take it one step further. Do something, because it is incumbent upon each of us to act. Take what you learn to your local League of Women Voters, to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors. Get it into your community. It's as simple as sharing what you've learned with 3 other people. Do that. Do that after you're here today. Be a catalyst for change. Before we welcome our speaker and get started, I would like to remind you that our meeting today is being recorded. To best view our spotlighted speakers, choose Speaker View up in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Subtitles have been enabled. If you would like to activate, enlarge, or end the subtitles, use the button in the bottom of your screen. Toward the end of the session, we will have a question and answer period. During the presentation, please drop your questions into the chat and send them as a direct message to Question Asker. League members will pose our questions at the end of the session. Please join me in welcoming our American Sign Language interpreters for today, Sheila Kettering and Paula Bloomberg. And thank you to our League of Women Voters of Illinois Board of Directors, the entire League of Women Voters of Illinois Issues and Advocacy Committee, and everyone who has been part of bringing together this fantastic week of education and activation. So let's turn off all our other devices, lean in and engage. Issues and Advocacy Committee Co-Chair Jean Pierce will introduce our speaker. Jean.
Welcome to our 10th session of the 2022 League of Women Voters of Illinois Issues Briefing. This program is designed to give us an update on immigration legislation at the state and national levels. Our speaker this noon is Fred Tsao, Senior Policy Counsel of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Welcome, Mr. Tsao.
Thank you, Jean. Good to be with you. Good to be with everyone. And shall I get started?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me share my screen so that you'll have something to look at other than myself. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here. I had the pleasure of giving a similar presentation to the lead chapter in Bloomington Normal a few weeks ago. So this is, for those of you who were there, there's going to be some new material. For those of you who were not there, well, some of this may be a little bit familiar, but hopefully you'll find this all very interesting. So let me get started. Hopefully you're able to see these slides. Yeah, so I want to start off by kind of recapping the legislation that passed during the past year, particularly state legislation that we were able to succeed in winning enactment for. First and foremost is the Illinois Forward Act. This was kind of our capstone priority piece of legislation at ICRR during the past couple of years. And this culminated many years of advocacy. So basically what Illinois Forward does is, first off, it draws a pretty bright line separating local police from immigration enforcement, imposing a number of restrictions on what local police can do with respect to, particularly with respect to cooperation and communication with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And then it also strengthens some of the existing laws that were already on the books, specifically the Trust Act and the Voices Act. And I'll say a bit more about that as well a bit later on. Okay, so as I mentioned, Illinois Forward builds on really 10 years of advocacy work on the local and state level. Here's the roster of bills and other initiatives that we've been working on over those 10 years, starting this time 11 years ago, actually, with trying to win local legislation on the county and city level, and then working on the state level with then Governor Quinn on the Secure Communities program, in trying to remove the state from that federal program. You'll see several other bills, the Illinois Trust Act, which was actually a 3-year effort, and then various pieces of the Trust Act that we ended up not passing in 2017 that we were able to get passed later on. And Illinois Way Forward, again, pretty much finished the job that we started in 2014 when we first introduced the Trust Act. So what does this do? Again, this bars local police from most forms of collaboration with ICE. So no joint operations, no ICE access to police facilities or equipment or people in custody. Very restricted sharing of information regarding, people who may be in police or jail custody. And no direct transfers of people in police or police or jail or prison custody. There is one big exception if ICE sees fit to get a criminal warrant, to arrest or detain any particular individual. These various provisions have an exception for those cases. In which case there's an active criminal investigation as opposed to an immigration investigation. So another thing that this law does is it bars local law enforcement, local and state law enforcement from asking people what their immigration status is. Why is this important? Well, what the police don't know, they can't share with other people, including ICE agents. So we included this provision in there. People are free to share their immigration status information if they think it might be helpful, particularly when it comes to contacting a consulate. But even so, police cannot ask for that information. Okay, so probably the thing that's best known about Illinois Forward is this set of provisions described in this slide. So the Illinois Way Forward bans jails and police departments from entering into contracts with ICE to hold people for immigration detention purposes. And it required those jails that already had contracts to phase out those contracts. And there was a target date, well, a date of January 1st, this past January 1st, when that requirement would kick in. So combined, this provision combined with the bill that we passed 3 years ago to ban private prisons for immigration purposes and other civil detention purposes effectively ended ICE detention here in the state of Illinois. So I mentioned that there were other provisions that strengthen existing laws. So in particular, there's a law that we passed 4 years ago called the Voices Act, which had to do with immigrant survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and certain other kinds of criminal activity. If those individuals cooperate with law enforcement in investigating and prosecuting those kinds of offenses, those individuals should then qualify for federal protection under the U visa or T visa program. T visas for trafficking survivors, U visas for a broader range of criminal activity. Those applications, for better or worse, hinge on getting certifications from law enforcement agencies, basically saying that, yes, this person is in fact cooperating with law enforcement. Unfortunately, we were seeing lots of problems with law enforcement agencies just not following up on these certification requests, and that's what the Voices Act was for. It basically required law enforcement agencies to complete these certifications so that people can proceed with their applications. So what Illinois Forward did is set up an assumption that someone is cooperating with law enforcement as they're submitting these certification requests. It also required law enforcement agencies to provide a written notice if for one reason or another they deny someone a certification. The only reason that under Voices Act that someone could be denied a certification is if the law enforcement agency cannot actually establish that that person is a crime victim, is a victim of qualifying criminal activity. So, and the written notices also have to provide an opportunity for the person to appeal the denial. Okay. Another set of important provisions is the law enforcement agencies have to report to the Attorney General. First off, any interactions with ICE, any requests to cooperate or share information or turn someone over, or hold somebody in the jail until ICE is able to pick them up. And then also law enforcement agencies have to report on any requests they get to complete a U visa or T visa certification. And then the Attorney General is also empowered to investigate violations of all these laws and to take corrective action, or require the law enforcement agencies that are violating these laws to take corrective action. So this bill was signed into law on August 2nd of last year. I was there at Aurora High School for the signing ceremony, the Attorney General has issued guidance for law enforcement agencies as to what this requires. So there's no excuse for people to not be aware of this law. Specifically with respect to the jail contracts, so there were 3 jails that had contracts with ICE for immigration detention. One of those counties, Pulaski in far southern Illinois, basically acted right away. They said, okay, well, we're going to pull the plug on this contract, and that the jail was depurposed for or decommissioned for immigration enforcement during Labor Day weekend. The two other jails were McHenry County and Kankakee County. They saw fit to file a federal lawsuit to try to block Illinois, this part of Illinois Forward from going forward. That lawsuit got thrown out of court by a federal judge. The counties appealed. They won a temporary stay during the holidays, basically to give more time to consider arguments. And then when the appellate judges saw the arguments that were presented, they thought, okay, well, these counties are going to lose, and we're going to lift the stay. So that meant that the counties did need to go ahead and terminate their contracts. And both of those jails were decommissioned as of February 4th. So, almost exactly a month ago. That resulted in 41 people who were held between the two jails getting released. But for Illinois Forward, those people would have been languishing in the jails. But unfortunately, ICE saw fit to hold on to about 30 other people who were in those jails. We are still trying to follow the cases of those individuals. Those folks have been moved to jails in other states, in Indiana, in Kentucky, in Kansas, and as far away as Oklahoma. So we are still pushing for those people to be released. And probably more significantly, we are hoping that this legislation will add to further momentum in other states to try to end immigration detention altogether. So, we are aware of at least a couple of incidents that involve violations of Illinois Forward. So, if people hear about any such violations, we are urging them to call our family support hotline. This is the phone number 855-HELP-MY-FAMILY or 855-435-7693. More information about the hotline is available on our website, icrr.org. So, next up, I'm going to go through these other issue areas a bit more quickly. So there were a couple of developments regarding healthcare that happened last year. First off, ICRR is a member of the Healthy Illinois Coalition, along with a few dozen other groups, and those organizations, the entire coalition has slowly but surely been winning healthcare coverage, provided by the state for immigrants who otherwise are not insured and who do not otherwise qualify for medical assistance, but who are low income. So in 2020, the Healthy Illinois won coverage for immigrants who are 65 or older. And then, last year we were able to move the qualifying age a little bit to cover immigrants who are between 55 and 64. This is pretty significant. There are several, there are tens of thousands of immigrants who qualify for this coverage, and these are the immigrants who are probably most in need of healthcare coverage. ICRR also won enactment of Senate Bill 1840, which has to do with making sure that nonprofit hospitals are meeting their obligations under the state's charity care program. Now these not-for-profit hospitals have to provide reports on how they are meeting their charity care requirements, and thereby providing a bit more transparency regarding whether they are meeting those requirements or not. So that was another significant step on the healthcare front. Okay. So ICRR has also been part of a coalition led by Economic Security Illinois to win an expansion of the state's earned income credit. So many of you may be familiar with the federal earned income tax credit. Illinois has a similar tax credit that pretty much matches the federal credit. But unfortunately, there are lots of people who are not covered by the federal credit and therefore not covered by the state credit either. So what we want to do is try to expand eligibility to cover caregivers who may or may not have earned income. This includes parents, parents of dependent children, as well as many immigrant families who are paying their taxes using an individual taxpayer ID number that's issued by the Treasury Department, as opposed to a Social Security number. These families, because they are filing with something other than a Social Security number, are also not eligible for the state credit, and not eligible for the federal credit, and therefore not currently eligible for the state credit. So what we're trying to do is win eligibility for those families as well. So, last year we were able to win really significant bipartisan support. Unfortunately, we were not able to get this over the hump, and instead we were able to win, kind of emergency funding from the states to provide assistance for immigrant families during and in the wake of the pandemic. We've also been able to win additional coverage for immigrant services. And that is the next topic here. Immigrants, so we at ICRR administer the Immigrant Services Line, which provides programming for three main programs: the New Americans Initiative, which is our citizenship program; the Immigrant Family Support Program, which provides, which educates immigrants regarding public benefit programs that they may be eligible for, and also provides interpretation services and case management for those families as they're going through the application process. And then more recently, again, with, as a pandemic related measure, we are running what we call the Immigrant Family Support Program, which provides direct cash assistance for many immigrants who are left out of COVID relief. They were not eligible for the stimulus payments. They weren't eligible for unemployment benefits, again, because of their status. So, this program provided some measure of support for those families. So that was funded at $44 million last year, 30 million of which was for the cash assistance, and then the remaining 14 million for the other two programs. We were also able to patch together additional funding from the Department of Human Services, specifically to assist Afghan and Haitian arrivals. Obviously the situation in Afghanistan emerged after the General Assembly's session ended last spring. So, so the Department of Human Services was able to identify additional funding to go into, primarily to go into the Family Resource Program and the Family Support Program to assist those populations. So we're currently funded at a total of 50 million. And for this year, we are seeking a bump to $53 million. The additional $3 million is intended to allow our partner organizations to basically hold on to staff. We have a very hot job market these days. Many people who work for nonprofits are essentially being recruited to work in, to do other work that may be somewhat more lucrative, that certainly pay better than the nonprofits are able to. So, consider this a cost of living bump for the organizations that are providing these services. And then we also want to help many immigrants defray the costs of applying for citizenship. So we would be providing scholarships to help pay the fees for immigrants who, are not indigent enough to qualify for the existing fee waivers, but who still need the assistance. So that's what we're up to this year, and this transitions into other things that we're doing this year. So we are also revisiting the earned income credit proposal that we were trying to move this past year. So we have filed new legislation, and you see the bill numbers here, SB 3774, sponsored by Senator Aquino, and House Bill 4920, sponsored by Representative Amons from the Champaign area. So this year's proposal, in contrast to last year, would phase in implementation over 3 years, and then also explicitly provide a $600 child tax credit. This essentially matches the federal credit that was available as a pandemic measure through all of last year that unfortunately expired back in January. So both bills are have significant support, but we're kind of nearing the end of the legislative session, and we realize that a lot of this is just going to be resolved, when the General Assembly works out its state budget for the next fiscal year. So this is going to be essentially worked out in the budget process, as will this year's healthcare proposal. We have coverage for immigrants who are 55 and older. We also already have coverage for children under 18 under the All Kids program. So basically what we want to do this year is finish the job and basically win coverage for everybody else, who would qualify for income, but for their immigration status. And just make sure that immigrants who are between 18 and 54 are able to get healthcare coverage as well. So you see the bill numbers here again: House Bill 4437, sponsored by Representative Delia Ramirez, and then the Senate bill is 3989, sponsored by Senator Pasiones Zayas. Again, this is going to be in the mix when it comes to the state budget. Okay. Another bill that we're working on that was moving last year, and we're trying to move it this year as well, is Senate Bill 3144. This is legislation that would make it a state policy that everybody who is going through immigration or deportation proceedings should have an attorney representing them. And then it also would set up a task force to develop recommendations on how to best provide for such legal representation. So this is legislation that in a different form or a different bill passed both the House and the Senate last year, but unfortunately, it got kind of stuck because it passed in different versions, and there was no agreement with respect to which version should move forward. Fortunately, that issue has been resolved. So now, and the bill has already passed the Senate. It's actually due up in House committee next week, and hopefully that will. The bill will move forward without any hitches. And again, the bill did pass last year with overwhelming support. Hopefully this will pass this year as well. So, okay. I did also want to mention a few other issues that we're not working on this year, but we do want to kind of lay some groundwork, do some additional research, and talk with legislative allies regarding what can be done about these issues in the years to come. First off, non-citizen voting. This issue actually came up last year in the context of the Chicago Elected School Board and the Police Accountability Board. And there was actually legislation introduced last year to allow non-citizens to vote in school board elections. So that bill is not moving this year. And we understand this is going to be a bit of a challenge in the years to come. So, we are trying to figure out, okay, what would this legislation look like? Who are the stakeholders who are involved? Can we build up a good amount of support for whatever proposal we choose to move forward? This could be similar to the bill last year regarding school board elections, which would cover every school board throughout the state. Another possibility is selecting certain municipalities, to try out, non-citizen voting in municipal elections in those communities. An obvious candidate would be Chicago, but there may be other communities that may lend themselves to, to non-citizen voting for municipal elections, mayors, city councils, village boards, and the like. So that's that's one issue. Second issue has to do with driver's licenses. This is a little complicated, but bear with me here. So the state currently has 3 different versions of regular driver's licenses. Many of you may be familiar with the Real ID licenses that require proof of legal immigration status. Those licenses are valid for boarding a plane or entering a federal building, or or certain other federal locations. If you're like me and don't particularly care about any of that stuff, or have a passport that you can use instead, you can still get what are called standard licenses. That's again, again, people with people with immigration status are able to get. And then undocumented motorists have what are called temporary visitor driver's licenses, which is something that we were able to win back in 2013. Roughly 350,000 motorists here in Illinois have TVDLs. It's a very successful program. Unfortunately, it also kind of flags people as undocumented. And so what we would like to do, again, kind of in the longer term, is fold the TVDL population into the standard license population. This has been done in other states, so we'd like to do that here as well. And that way, undocumented motorists won't necessarily be flagging themselves as lacking legal status if they produce or even apply for a TVDL. So this is going to require the cooperation of whoever the new Secretary of State is going to be now that Jesse White is retiring. So we look forward to working with whoever he or she is going to be. So that's another long-term issue. And then the third long-term issue is the criminal legal system, criminal justice reform. So we'd like to work in solidarity with Blacklight organizations and other organizations that are working on this issue. There was significant movement on this front last year. The Black Caucus moved forward, was able to win approval of the SAFE-T Act that abolished cash bail and made certain other reforms. Which were significant steps forward, but the work is not done, and we still need to address, remaining, disparities within the criminal legal system. So we look forward to working on that issue as well. So that's that was in a nutshell our state work. I want to pivot here to work on the federal level, and kind of first and foremost, we were working through much of this latter half of last year, actually through much of the entirety of last year, on federal legislation to win legalization for the undocumented. And the strategy that our leaders in Congress, including Senator Durbin, who played a key role in this, as well as Congressman Chuy Garcia, who was also really instrumental in moving this forward, was using a process called budget reconciliation, which has the major advantage of being able to get around the Senate filibuster. So in order to pass something for budget reconciliation, you only need a simple majority and not 60 votes on the Senate side. So, there were a number of proposals covering different populations that were brought up on the Senate side. So Plan A, as you'll see here, was covered 4 populations. People who are eligible for the DREAM Act, essentially those who came as children, immigrants who are eligible for temporary protected status, that is, they came from countries that they cannot be safely deported to, and therefore are covered by this designated status. Agricultural workers, there's been, for the last 20 years, there have been attempts to pass legislation to cover agricultural workers. So they were in the mix as well. And then, as kind of a pandemic-related measure, other immigrants who are working in essential fields, whether it's manufacturing or medical care, healthcare, certain other fields, infrastructure, transportation, logistics. Many of those immigrants who are working in those fields would be covered as well. There was a Plan B that's covered, that would change an existing part of the immigration law called registry, which basically said anybody who came in before a certain cutoff date can qualify, and met a handful of other requirements, could qualify for a green card. The proposal was to grant green cards to anybody who came in before January 1st, 2010. Mind you, the current registry cutoff date is 1972. So this would cover quite a number of people. And then failing that, there was a Plan C, which would not extend green cards, but would at least extend a parole or a temporary protection for people who came in before a certain cutoff date. And that cutoff date that was actively proposed was January 1st, 2011. Each of these plans were submitted to the Senate parliamentarian, who had to give the thumbs up or thumbs down as to whether these proposals were appropriate for budget reconciliation. And each in its turn was shot down by the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian believed that basically granting green cards or granting immigration protections was something that kind of went beyond just pure spending measures that would otherwise qualify for budget reconciliation. So unfortunately, unfortunately, we were not able to move forward on any of those, and budget reconciliation overall, hit a major roadblock in the person of Joe Manchin. So, apparently there have been some conversations about trying to bring back certain pieces of what had been in Build Back Better, but no concrete movement to date yet. So, if that does move forward, I think some hopes remain that some immigration provision will be included in that, despite the parliamentarians' previous rulings. So that's what's happening with federal legislation. That said, the Biden administration on its own has undertaken several steps, for the most part, to undo measures that were put in place by their predecessors, but also to do certain things more proactively. So, for instance, on immigration enforcement, the previous administration basically unleashed ICE to basically arrest anybody and everybody and their mothers. Here the Biden administration has put in place a number of limitations on what ICE can do. So, for instance, it's cut back on worksite enforcement, and in particular, if and when there is a worksite raid, which has not been happening very much, the focus of those raids would be on the employers themselves and any kind of abuses that they're inflicting, as opposed to trying to arrest workers wholesale. Similarly, the administration has expanded what they're calling protected areas. This used to be known as sensitive locations. So these are places, areas, locations where immigration enforcement should not be happening unless there's a really darn good reason. So this includes faith institutions, churches, medical facilities. The administration has added social service agencies and disaster or emergency assistance sites, significantly rallies and locations of demonstrations. All of those locations should be, for the most part, off limits for ICE enforcement. Biden's DHS has also reimposed or restored a set of immigration priorities that focus on people who pose threats to public safety or national security. One kind of good thing, but also kind of mixed thing, is that the administration is decoupling criminal history or criminal convictions from the notion from any kind of presumption that those folks, just because they've been convicted or arrested, necessarily pose a threat to public safety or national security. So that's a fairly positive step. But that said, though, as I mentioned earlier, immigration enforcement is still in place, and specifically immigration detention is still in place. And this administration is still maintaining, and in some cases even expanding, immigration enforcement. The administration is also expanding what they're calling alternatives to detention. Now, when you think of alternatives to detention, you might think of community care or check-ins or things like that. In this case, though, alternatives to detention means ankle monitors or other kinds of surveillance that unfortunately can be just as restrictive and just as debilitating as actually being locked up. The big advantage of alternatives is that you can at least be with your family. You could at least work if you're able to. But again, the monitoring can also be very, very, very limiting. And so so it's not as though we are supporting these kinds of alternatives instead of brick and mortar detention. We actually are calling to scale down both. Okay. Border enforcement. This is another area where the record is kind of mixed. Unfortunately, this administration has kept in place, some of the measures that were in place under their predecessors. They have, to their credit, tried to end the migrant protection protocols or remain in Mexico, but unfortunately, they are now under a court order that requires them to reinstate the program. So people who are seeking refuge here in the United States, for the most part, need to wait in Mexico or another country while their cases are pending. They've also left in place Title 42, which was a pandemic-related measure that essentially, meant that, for the most part, again, people seeking refuge, people who are caught at the border, can be summarily expelled from the country. And this happened most prominently with the Haitians who were arriving in the United States and who gathered under the bridge in Texas back in September of last year. Nearly all of those individuals were deported back to Haiti under Title 42, even though Haiti is also one of the countries that's covered under temporary protected status because of the political uncertainty and the effects of the earthquakes that have happened over the past few years. To its credit, the Biden administration has also, for the most part, stopped construction of the border wall. That said, oh, there's a typo there. The border wall, that should be. Though the funding for the border wall remains in place, and apparently the administration is doing some touch-up work on various parts of the border barrier that were not fully completed. The Biden administration has also more positively, hired more immigration judges. It is also trying to undo much of the rewriting of asylum regulations that their predecessors put in place. There was a proposed rewrite that was published back last summer. Unfortunately, there's not been a whole lot of movement on this. Hopefully there'll be a more complete rewrite coming out in the next few months or so. Okay. Last couple of things here I want to mention. First off is DACA. On day one, President Biden pledged to preserve and fortify the DACA program. Unfortunately, a federal judge in Texas kind of single-handedly ruled that when DACA was put in place under President Obama, the administration acted improperly. They did not go through proper procedures. So based on that ruling, Judge Hainan barred any new applications for DACA. So people who are newly qualifying for DACA, and largely this is based on now meeting age requirements or education requirements. Those people are not eligible for, are not able to proceed with their DACA applications. Fortunately, Judge Hainan also recognized that there are hundreds of thousands of younger people who rely on DACA, who are working due to DACA protections. And so he left in place coverage for DACA for those people. Those people are still able to renew their DACA if and when it expires. Now, in light of the judge's ruling, the administration has proposed regulations to essentially write DACA into federal rules. This addresses some of the concern that Judge Hainan raised, and basically tries to fix the problem that Judge Hainan flagged. So the proposed rule was published back last fall. It's not really clear how soon Homeland Security will finish in publishing a final rule, but hopefully again that will be fairly soon as well. Okay. Something similar that we're also working on is public charge. So public charge is the part of the immigration law that says that the federal government can bar someone from coming into the country or prevent that person from getting a green card if they believe that that person is going to be dependent on on public support for their livelihood. So the last administration saw fit to put the public charge doctrine on steroids. They issued a rule back in 2019 that counted many more types of federal and state government support, medical assistance, nutritional assistance, housing programming were counted for public charge purposes. There were also various quantitative standards that were put in place. So, for instance, if you're too old or too young or don't make enough money or are too sick, you could be considered likely to become a public charge and therefore barred from getting a green card or getting a visa. This obviously, all of this was incredibly confusing and incredibly scary. So, not surprisingly, this created a huge chilling effect among immigrant families, many of whom could have applied for benefits for family members or may have themselves been eligible for public benefits, but they just chose not to apply, and in many cases disenrolled from these programs for fear that their immigration status would be jeopardized. So fortunately, with the new administration, that 2019 rule is no longer in effect. I shouldn't add that with the 2019 rule saw any number of legal challenges, including one brought by us at ICRR in collaboration with Cook County. That litigation actually ended up with a favorable court decision that provided the basis for the Biden administration to undo the 2019 rule. So yay us. What got left in its place is a previous guidance issued under the Clinton administration that was much narrower than the 2019 rule, that only counted cash benefits and long-term institutional care paid for by government programming. So, the Biden administration wanted to make sure that that we're not just relying on an agency guidance. So they started a regulatory process to basically seek input on what public charge should look like. They began this process back last fall, and in just a few weeks ago, they took the next step in this process and published a proposed rule, not counting medical or nutritional or housing benefits, only counting the immigrant, whatever benefits the immigrant him or herself receives, and not counting benefits received by family members, and also removing many of these really onerous quantitative standards. So there is now a comment period that's on the proposed rule. We think this proposed rule is pretty good. It could be improved in certain ways, so we'll be submitting comments to try to urge the administration to go even further in undoing the previous administration's rules, and then hopefully sometime after after the comment period ends, we will see a final rule issued by Homeland Security. Okay, so I want to close here by pointing out ways to get involved. So we provide action alerts, for both the state and federal level. So here's the information. You can text the same number, 52886. So for the state, it's everybody in. And for federal, it's citizenship for all. Go ahead and, if you want to go ahead and text those words or text those letters into, to that number, you should receive, you should receive a text in response. And, if you then go ahead and confirm, click the link in the text to confirm your participation. You should be getting regular updates. So, and of course, you can also get a hold of me as well. I'm readily available. I know quite a number of you have been in direct contact with me and my colleagues. So I'm happy to answer answer any questions or provide any guidance, whatever, on further advocacy steps. So with that, I will stop the share and yeah.
Thank you, Fred. That was a lot, and congratulations on the wins that you've had. So my question is, what kind of help can we provide? Should we be focusing primarily on the issues you raised about healthcare, legal counsel, EITC, and so in the budget, or should we be focusing on those bills?
Okay, so the answer is all of the above. I know Representative Amons in particular has been doing a lot of work among her colleagues to get additional co-sponsors on her version of the EIC bill. I think she's up to 40. No, actually, she's up to 54. And there are only 71 Democratic House members. So she's she's at this rate she'll cover the entire Democratic caucus. Definitely reaching out to your state senators, state representatives, making sure they're on board with these priorities. I think certain legislators are going to be particularly important with respect to the state budget. Obviously, Speaker Welch, Majority Leader Harris, and then the two of them have designated 4 House members, House Democrats, who are who will be their point people on the budget. Representatives Lisa Hernandez, Robin Gable, Will Davis, and Mike Zalewski. And then on the Senate side, obviously President Harman, Majority Leader Lightford, and then the Senate Appropriations Chair LG Sims are all going to be really important as well.
Thank you very much. Rosemary, I believe you have some questions.
I do. Valerie wanted to know how many people in Illinois are classified as immigrants.
Yeah, so the state's total population is of 12.8 million, roughly. Of that, about 1.4 million are foreign born. It may actually be slightly more than that. And that is not counting children of immigrants who, I counted that population. If you add all that up, it may account for 1/4 of the state's population, are either immigrants themselves or children of immigrants.
Okay, thank you. Janet Kraft wasn't quite sure about the funding for ICE. You mentioned a little bit in your talk. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, and actually, there's late breaking news on this. So funding for ICE is part of the overall appropriations package to keep the federal government open past this Friday. And what we learned yesterday morning, actually, is that the spending bill that Congress is considering now. In fact, it passed the House yesterday. I believe the Senate is going to vote on it, if not today or tomorrow. Essentially keeps ICE and Customs and Border Protection funded at the same levels as basically the last few years. So basically, we're stuck with the same levels of funding for immigration enforcement as we had under the previous administration. So what Homeland Security is going to do with all that funding is a bit up in the air. One particularly troubling part of this is that even though there's been a major drop in immigration detention during the pandemic, largely because people were not being taken into custody, on the border, and then ICE wasn't carrying out very many, as many arrests. So the numbers of people in detention dropped to as low as 14,000 from an all-time high of more than 50,000 under the last administration. Numbers have since bounced back to about 18,000, but still ICE would be funded for 34,000 detention beds through the rest of this fiscal year. So that's a very, very troubling development, and one that we have liked to have seen a better outcome on.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions and one of my own related to public charge. So I'll throw you all three and you figure out. So the one is from Margaret, wanting to know what are the changes you hope to see in the new public charge policy that is forthcoming? And then my question about public charge is there, or do you hope there's some provision that after a person has been in this country a certain length of time, that they then might have access to services they might not have had under public charge? And then Mary wants to know, can we get a link to comment on the new public charge rule?
Okay, I'll take those in reverse order, and you may need to remind me. So the easy question is, if you go to regulations.gov and do a search for public charge, you should be able to come up with the proposed rule. And then there should also be a link to submit comments. I should note here that the national strategy, so far as comments go, is to keep them to a relatively small number. And the reason for that is that we don't want to bog down DHS in reviewing and considering the comments. So unlike, back in 2018, 2019, when we were dealing with a really horrible public charge rule, we bombarded Homeland Security with comments. We got more than 250,000 comments submitted. So this time around, we wanted to keep comments, relatively low number and relatively high quality. So, I appreciate the impulse to submit comments. It may be better, it may be better rather than submitting an individual comment. If you see, well, we're going to be circulating sign-on comments, that you can join. That we hope will make, will support many of the positive changes that we're seeing, but also call for some of the other changes that we're seeing, which include, which include not counting any forms of cash assistance, or certainly not counting state or local cash assistance. There's some ambiguity, particularly as the city of Chicago and Cook County roll out their universal basic income pilot programs. Is that going to count? We're fairly clear that pandemic assistance is not going to count, so that's good. But there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of reason to count really any kind of cash assistance. And we're still kind of concerned about the counting long-term institutional care as well. So we're kind of wanting to think through how far we want to go in that respect. But Yeah, so that's, those are, the kind of the two top changes that we're contemplating. With respect to benefits that people are eligible for, one of the kind of really screwy things about the public charge rule is that people who would be subject to a public charge determination, mainly, basically green card applicants or visa applicants, aren't eligible for these benefits anyway, either because they're undocumented or they're here on temporary visas. And even many people after they get their green card are not eligible for many of these benefits, because under existing federal law that passed 25 years ago, there's a 5-year bar on many of these programs. This is one of these mean-spirited, Newt Gingrich-inspired laws that were meant to discourage people, from trying to immigrate here, because they were viewed as, they're coming in only to get public benefits. Well, they're still coming in, but they're just not getting the benefits. And for the most part, they're not getting benefits for the first 5 years in which they're here. So that said, U.S. citizens, longer term permanent residents, refugees, certain other people with humanitarian protections are eligible for most forms of public assistance, and just based on humanitarian grounds. And so, for instance, if say an undocumented parent has U.S. citizen children, the children in the household are able to receive Medicaid. They are eligible for SNAP benefits, nutritional benefits. They may, and other forms of assistance. And one last thing here is that this is the whole purpose behind our Family Resource Program, the IFRP, which provides, again, education and support for immigrants who may need this support and may have difficulty in getting it.
There's a follow-up on that topic. Deborah wants to know, is there any coverage for childcare or daycare so that parents can get a job and earn money?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by coverage.
She might mean credits on the tax, or she might mean aid, whatever is available or is not.
Okay, so I think that this could come up in the context of EIC. One of the things that the EIC legislation would do is provide that child tax credit, and eventually that would be phased in to cover parents' households without any earned income. That is, they're stay-at-home parents, who are caring full-time for their children. So those households would be eligible for the child tax credit event, once this legislation is passed and fully implemented. So I hope that answers the question, and if not,
I hope so. If not, Deborah can just send us another chat with more. And Jean had one, right?
Yes. When do you anticipate that Ukrainian refugees will be coming to the U.S., and are people gearing up for that?
Yeah, that's a good question, considering what's in the news of late. So the situation in Ukraine is really unfortunate, and in many respects unnecessary, if downright stupid. I think the latest numbers were that 2 million Ukrainians have already fled the country, with as many as 4 million ultimately projected to leave. That's 10% of the country's population, by the way. For the most part, the Ukrainians are going to Poland. Smaller numbers are going to Slovakia and Hungary and Romania, basically neighboring countries in Eastern Europe. We're not really anticipating Ukrainian refugees ending up here, if only because the refugee process is really kind of torturous. As we learned with Afghanistan, there's a lot of vetting involved in the refugee process. It takes months, if not years. If anybody is going to arrive from Ukraine anytime soon, it's more likely to be people with means who are somehow able to buy a plane, who are able to buy a plane ticket, and who arrive at O'Hare or Midway or elsewhere and claim asylum. And do so, or they may find some other way of arriving in the United States, say on a tourist visa or student visa. There have been some media reports regarding Russians and Ukrainians who are making their way to Mexico and trying to cross there. That's not something I would advise, again, especially with Title 42 and Remain in Mexico in place. But apparently that's a thing. It's enough people are doing that it's gained some media attention. Now, mind you, these are not people who are fleeing the invasion that only started 2 weeks ago. These are people who left Russia or Ukraine months ago and got to Mexico and are now trying to cross. And again, I question whether anybody who's trying to flee Ukraine now are going to take that route.
Well, that's all I have, Jean. How about you?
I guess I was wondering, based on your response, whether you might anticipate that it might become easier to grant asylum given the fact that Ukrainians are white, just to be blunt about it.
Well, yeah. A couple of responses to that. Our asylum system, as I think I noted, is already very, very badly backlogged largely because of the situation at the border and let's just say the mismanagement of the asylum process under the previous administration. So even with all the additional new immigration judges in place, it's going to take a while to work through that backlog. This is one of the reasons why, in the case of Afghans, many of whom are here on parole as opposed to being formally recognized as refugees, there's a movement afoot to pass legislation that would give them the opportunity after a couple of years to just straight up apply for green cards. We have similar legislation in place for Cubans, by the way. So rather than flooding the asylum system with all these Afghan cases, why not just address that population by giving them all green cards? Whether that's going to affect Ukrainians, again, it may depend on whether we see any kind of significant population of Ukrainians coming into the country and trying to file for asylum. Again, it's not an easy process and it's very badly backlogged. That said, I should also note here, many of you may have seen that about a week ago, actually it was a week ago today, the Homeland Security extended temporary protected status for Ukrainians who are already in the United States, who may face deportation because either they're out of status or they're or they may be still here on a current visa, but their visas may be about to expire. So those Ukrainians are not going to get deported back to Ukraine, and they'll be protected for 18 months, and they'll be able to get work permits. The day before that, interestingly enough, the Biden administration also granted or re-granted temporary protected status to Sudan and South Sudan, two countries that had temporary protected status. I believe for one of those two countries, TPS was about to expire. So those two African countries got their TPS renewed. All that said as well, there are many other countries that are experiencing armed conflicts or armed violence that are not covered by TPS, and for which there have been active campaigns to get them covered by TPS. These are countries like Ethiopia, where there's civil war in the Tigray region, or Cameroon, where the French speakers and the English speakers are essentially killing each other, or Mauritania, where there's also armed conflict. There are other countries, particularly in Central America, that have also been really devastated by gang violence that are not covered by TPS. So, I think that's, the grant of TPS to Ukraine is a good thing. Don't get me wrong, but we kind of wish that the Biden administration would also see fit to cover these other countries that are flying below the radar, and that, quite frankly, are not white, not made up of white people. That they would get these similar protections as well.
So thank you so much. We truly appreciate receiving your updates each year. And thank you also to the League members and Friends of League for staying engaged and informed. To learn about upcoming opportunities for advocacy, please join the LWVIL Immigration Google group. Contact issues at lwvil.org to do so. And now please stick around briefly to complete a short evaluation poll, but then anyone who would like to stick around for the next 10 minutes, and we'll unmute people who raise their hands electronically and open up the chat. Then we're trying to give it more of a meeting of a feeling of an in-person meeting. And then please join us at 5:30 for a session discussing why abolishing the Electoral College is critical to preserving our democracy. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
And I can stick around too if folks, have any additional comments or questions.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can always put off